Welcome to Police Canine Radio. Rich, what's going on?
We turned the table around today.
We did.
Change things up a little bit. We had a few people tell us that we look like newscasters before, and God knows we don't have enough credibility to be newscasters.
That's not setting the bar all that high, quite frankly, nowadays.
Oh, could we be CNN newscasters? Oh, sorry. Sorry if I offended anybody. Just kidding.
2% of our audience, I think.
Yeah, just like, I'm not going to listen anymore. What's new? What's going on? You've been busy.
Yeah. First things first, if you guys are listening to this on the podcast, do me a favor, go to show notes, click on the YouTube. You're going to want to watch this one. We've got like a dozen videos we're going to show. This is all on engagement. We're going to have Steve Sprouse come in here. He's got a bunch of videos he's going to share, and we are going to get into the nuts and bolts of how to work the prosthetics right, because God knows we've seen some hokey stuff out there with some of you guys, no offense, doing some weird shit with the prosthetics. So Steve's going to set everybody straight, kind of show the intent and how they came about, and so that's going to be a great interview, but it's going to be lost in translation if you can't watch it.
No, and I think that's kind of the way we're heading with a lot of the future podcasts coming up. We've had a little bit sprinkled into the first few that we've done on YouTube, but the goal is not only bring information out there, but give you some videos so you can also see what we're talking about. I'm a visual learner. I know you could tell me something. I could attempt to read it in a book, but if I don't see the pictures and I don't see how it's going, then I'm going to lose a little bit of that. So our goal is to have a broader breadth of information that we're pushing out there, and no better with the technology that we have today than to use videos. I think it makes things a little stronger and clearer for the listener.
Absolutely, 101%. See what I did there? Everybody's doing 100%.
You're one.
I'm going to do one better.
That's nobody's done that before.
Nobody's done it.
No, it's first time.
Nobody will do it ever again.
You were just down south.
Yes. So,
down Southern California.
Twice.
Yeah, this is a nationwide show, so down south could mean
could be South Carolina.
Yeah, we're not there.
Yep, Southern California. 2 weeks ago, did a supervisor's course in Palm Springs. Shout out to Palm Springs PD for hosting that. I had 36 people in the class. Bill Lewis and I do that one. And you can get more information on the supervisor courses. Go to Canine. He gets all mad when I get it wrong. Tactical Canine, K9, USA.com. And he also does the Canine Handler 360. This is called Supervision 365. So great class. It stirred a lot of discussion, especially with the 835A, which has been a hot topic here in California. And Illinois got the same thing, and it's kind of moving across country. So just to touch upon that really quickly, it kind of the definitions that are set up almost makes it look like canines could be construed as deadly force. And we have some attorneys saying it's going to be, and it's going that direction. And then we have some prominent attorneys saying absolutely not. It's not going that way. So it's clear as mud right now. And so what it means to handlers, especially in California, just be smart with our deployments. If it's a 488, let's not turn this into a strong arm 211. If it's a 459 vehicle, which is like a burglary of a vehicle, let's do some other things along the way. Let's just make sure our deployments are solid.
I think the days of, and I'll throw myself on the sword, right? So you have a shoplift, just so everybody across the nation knows what our numbers are, right? You have a shoplift, somebody walks into a convenience store, grabs a bag of candy, heads towards the door, the clerk stands in their way. So prior to the clerk standing in the way, you have a shoplift. Now the clerk stands in the way and the suspect punches him in the face and walks out the door. Now our shoplift has turned into a strong arm robbery. Doesn't change the scenario a whole lot and doesn't put us on much stronger footing for a dog apprehension on that one. Will it work? Potentially. Is it what we should be doing? Is that the path that we should be going as canine handlers right now when the scrutiny is higher than it's ever been? Maybe not. Maybe at least take the time to think about that. Find some more information. If that guy has done this strong arm robbery 100 times in the past, we're looking for him. We know he's a problem. He's continuing to be a danger. All those things are building up. Maybe it's a dog call. But if it's a 17-year-old kid, grabbed a pack of gum and punched the clerk on the way out, just take a second and stop and think about it and know if that's the apprehension that you want to make with your dog.
Yeah. Other things from 835A, they talk about tactical repositioning, and de-escalation. And you guys need to be putting that not only in your reports, but in your training logs. And that was a hot topic as well. Not every time you bring your dog out at training should it be a deployment. And not every time do you do a search, it should be a bite. Make sure you're allowing opportunities for your decoy to surrender and logging that, because that's what they're looking at, and that's where you're going to be picked up.
And that's what we're going to do. As DTAC, as trainers, we're going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be adding all of those things in. We do that in most trainings anyway, but we're going to make sure we're checking the box. So like, all right, did we do de-escalation? Did we do tactical repositioning? Did we do a call that doesn't even involve a dog? Did we use the dog? Were we conscientious of time on bite? Like, we're going to be aware of all of those things so that the handlers are getting the training that they need to have.
101%.
101%. Here we go.
Okay. Secondly, last week I was in San Diego. CHP does their yearly conference with their trainers and supervisors. Shout out to those guys, man. They know how to host a conference and take care of instructors. Got the VIP treatment at the airport.
Oh,
picked me up in a white van.
Whoa,
took me to
like one
conference.
of my, like a van like I have.
No, not the scary. What's this guy's intentions? Grab my kids and pull them in.
I got puppies and otter pups in there.
Yeah, I know.
There we go.
And some other things we won't get into. But no, they do a great job. And all the CHP guys were like so receptive and excited and just enthusiastic about what they're doing. So shout out to those guys and gals. Great team out there. So
they're doing a lot of new stuff. CHP, I know they've got Michael Ellis touching in on some of their training. Yep. Cameron Ford's working with him on some of their training. Whoever's making these decisions, and you know more because you were just down there, but props to somebody who came in and realized we can do better. Yes. And we can bring in some people that know more than we know. And I mean, Michael Ellis is tops of the tops when it comes to dog training, right? So just being like, hey, can we get touched by bringing you in for the supervisor portion? Like really good forward thinking and training for those guys.
Yeah, and that's Sergeant Jeff Bosnich is kind of like facilitating that. And it's like one of those, like say, the bigger the agency, the bigger the ship.
Yeah.
And to make changes, it's kind of like a slow process. Sure. But no, they're doing a good job. So
good for them. We're working a couple young dogs. Remember, we talked about it in the last podcast. We got 3 dogs in from Slovakia, and the one thing that we really like about the dogs is they come in hot, right? Their possession is through the roof. We know they bite things. We know they love to get the ball on the rope. There's not a whole lot of let go in there. There's not a lot of sit downs and heels going on in there. So we spent the first 2 weeks with those dogs hand feeding them. Just sat there in front of them, loaded the marker. Yes, food. Yes, food. Over and over and over again. Put our pet trainers on them. Just let everybody decompress, have a relationship with us. That went really good. We just started moving into the toy work, put them up on the table, kept everybody safe, give them a toy, tell them to out, give them another toy. To nauseam, to the point where the dog's like, yeah, I get it. I get a toy, I spit it out, I get it. And now, I mean, it's just calmed them way down. Everything's starting to settle in. Really nice dogs, having a good time with them. But taking that 3 weeks to a month to just develop a relationship is huge. Huge. Yeah. So if you're out there and you get a green dog and nobody's done that for you, you go to a large vendor, you get your green dog, take that same time. That works just as well for other handlers as it does for us. So it's not a secret sauce. Take that time with your dog, hang out for a week or 2, hand feed them, then back time. Especially if you're not used to playing toy with a dog that's losing its mind and trying to shark at it, back time. So you have a nice safety barrier, give them a toy, pull out another toy, just trade for a while so they understand the value of that.
Nice.
It's huge. Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Hey, I'm going to do something a little different on this one. We are not going to do the quote of the day. Got a couple stories, and I got like a law enforcement question that I think we all need to ponder.
Okay.
All right. So you ready for the first one?
I'm ready. I'm intrigued.
All right. Well, the perfect crime was committed last night.
Where? What happened?
Well, somebody broke into the police station, stole all the toilets.
Oh.
Police have nothing to go on.
Okay. All right. That was a good setup.
All right, you want another one?
I probably don't. Go ahead.
I heard Celery was arrested last night.
For what?
For stalking.
Uh-huh. Okay. You've been on the internet. Is that it? Is that what we're set?
No, there's one more.
There's one more.
It keeps going.
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay. So this is a law enforcement question.
All right. I'm ready.
If a cop arrests a mime, does he have to give him his right to remain silent?
We should probably move on.
You're probably right.
Sorry, folks. Maybe we go back to the quote of the day next week.
Okay. Okay.
Who do we have on today?
We got Steve Sprouse.
Oh,
So
Arm and Leggin.
Arm and Leggin.
That's good.
I'm gonna grab your.
Reminds me. I've been. Here we go. I feel much more. Are you stretching?
I'm stretching.
Ooh, work it out, man. Work it out.
Working that meniscus.
No, I understand. Don't want to show the real arm. No, that's obviously we're talking to Steve about prosthetics, and which have become a pretty useful tool for us. We use it a lot. We're not the only agency or training group out there that's using prosthetics. There's a lot of guys and gals out there in the canine world that are using prosthetics. We are going to talk to Steve about how to use them the best way, how they're intended to be used, and how he got into using them and why he uses them. Obviously, it's a good proofing tool. This is pretty convincing, right? If I'm a dog, it doesn't look like a bite sleeve, doesn't look like a bite suit. Mm-hmm. I mean, it may not be exactly the same as biting a human arm, obviously, but it's a pretty damn nice bridge.
Yeah, and as Steve says, it's like creating that illusion. And in talking about engagement, basically we're going to do a bunch of things to try to take the dog to the actual thing that he's going to see on the street. So we're big proponents of using the muzzle. We use a hidden sleeve. We'll put clothing over the bite suit. We'll do civil agitation through a fence. And the application of the prosthetics is just one more thing you can do to try to replicate it. Because at the end of the day, we can do all of these things, but it's still going to be a little bit different. But we can move them a little closer. If you guys are just using the sleeves and bite suits and you're not doing any of this other engagement or transition work, I think you're maybe ill preparing your handlers for the street.
You're rolling the dice, right?
You really are.
I mean, and this is still rolling the dice. We saw somebody on social media actually within the last couple of days who raises and trains police dogs, and they posted a video of a dog that was chasing a suspect. The suspect started jumping fences, and the dog wasn't able to. The person that raises dogs said, "My dog will never have that problem. My dogs are amazing. If I sell you a dog, it's going to do all of these things and more." You're fooling yourself. We raise and train dogs, and honestly, we get them to the point where they're best ready to go to work, but there's always a chance of failure. There's probably an expectation of some failure, and then we have to do things to put the dog in the best light possible. The prosthetics, hidden sleeve, those kind of things. But you're right. If I go straight from big old fluffy bite suit to 10-8 on the street with a guy with no equipment, that's a big jump without being able to help the dog make that leap and be more successful at it.
It is. And there's a percentage of dogs that you could just show a bite sleeve or a suit and he goes out and he performs just fine on the street.
Sure.
It happens, right? So, however, I think there's a percentage of dogs that need that transition that's going to help them. In the supervisor course, I had one agency come up to me and he goes, "Hey, our dog got his first opportunity at a bite, and he jumped up and was just kind of grabbing the clothing and, wound up grabbing the suspect a little bit as the handler was fighting with him. And then, we're kind of concerned." I go, "How long the dog been on the street?" He goes, "A year." I said, "Think about that dog's been riding around for a year in the car. The only time it gets out is to take bathroom breaks, right? Or go into the PD or get pet by people or play ball. And now the handler hits the door pop and it's go time. And now this dog jumps out and is expected to perform." And I always say on the first engagement, if your dog grabs clothing or grabs an arm, and I don't care if it's just some tooth drags and it's maybe the injury is not that great, that's a success. The fact that they did that much, right? And so, it's one of those things, as handlers, do not expect your dog to engage. I don't care how good they look at training. There's always the potential that they won't. And number two, if you go to a broker and they go, "I guarantee 100% my dogs will always bite," I will say that person probably hasn't sold a lot of dogs, number one. And number two, there is no 100%. And I've bought a lot of dogs from a lot of places. And, if we're running 85 to 90% of our dogs engaging on the street, especially on the first engagement, man, I'm thrilled.
Well, and you always like to remind guys to make sure that you have the long line on, right? So you get a little back pressure on that, because that dog that bites the shirt, now I have a little, a long line tension, and I can help him out with that. That's not always possible, right? If you're doing a door pop or, it's not always an opportune situation to have a long line on. But if you can, you can, and it makes things a little more successful. The other thing is we are, as an industry, buying and selling dogs substantially younger than we ever have in the past.
True.
Right? We have a lot of 12, 14, 15, 16-month-old dogs that are on the street. And, you know, when you and I were starting off, if you could get a dog under 3, you were doing all right, right? Like we just weren't getting dogs that were that young. So now we're asking these young dogs to do old dog tricks. And that's a lot. And it is an unknown, you know, by the time we hand a dog off to an agency and it's 14 months old, we're just getting through the things that it needs to get through to be ready to go out on the street. It hasn't been tested on, you know, a guy with no equipment on. That's just not happening.
Absolutely. So. And think about how you guys are reacting out there as handlers too. Are you showing that dog the picture that they're going to see on the street when you're all excited and you're all pumped up and you're like, Stella, you know, and you're animated, you know, or is anytime the dog sees you raise your voice, he's in trouble. Right. And now you're in a confrontation and you're telling your dog to bite and now your voice is up here and the stress is in it. You know, it's a different picture for the dog.
Especially if you're a little bit argumentative with your dog, you know, if you have a little more of a conflict-laden relationship with your dog and you're always correcting your dog because maybe that's what your trainer has you doing or whatever it is. So if you're doing a lot of sit and off and, you know, you're yelling at your dog and then your dog like, all right, when he gets tuned up like that, I get corrected. And now the next time you yell at him is Foss or Stellan or, you know, Pocket or whatever you're doing, but you're screaming it at him. And the last time he heard you scream like that, he was getting told to lay down or knock it off or let go. He might take that, you know, your excitement for the bite work as a correction. So
101%.
101%. Here we go.
Okay. Let's get Steve on the phone.
You calling him?
I'm going to call him.
All right. So when as Gregg's calling Steve, this one's going to be a little bit on the technological side of things. We're going to be using the computer. We're going to be sharing some videos with you guys. There's going to be, I think we have 12 different videos on this one. So there'll be a lot to watch. This will be the time if you're doing the audio version to hit pause and see if you can't jump in on YouTube to watch the next dozen videos that we're going to be showing you as far as it pertains to prosthetics.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, are you there? Okay, on the line with us, we have Steve Sprouse. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm honored to be with you guys again, and I hope everything's going well with you.
Awesome, Steve. Thanks for joining us. We're pretty excited about this one, having the videos that you sent us and being able to talk about those. I think is going to help out a lot of young handlers and trainers out there that are using your prosthetics or something similar, like maybe the intoxicated guy with the newspaper rolled around his arm. Usually there's one. Usually there's one at every training that's willing to, you know, throw some duct tape and
God bless them.
God bless them, indeed.
Hey, Steve, can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and kind of what led you down this path of inventing these things?
Sure. Before I get started on that, I'd like to give you guys a little bit of accolades. Speaking of the videos that we may show, I had called a couple of the guys that were in the videos and I said, do you mind if we show these videos on a podcast or YouTube or whatever? And they said, no, go ahead. What are you doing? They said, well, I'm going to do a podcast with the police canine radio guys. And every single one of them said, you know what? Those guys are great. They're humble. They do a lot for the community. So I just wanted to throw that in there to say good job. And once again, I'm honored to be here with you.
Thank you very much.
Man, that means a lot.
Yeah, you are welcome for sure. So in reference to myself, I spent 35 years in law enforcement. 30 of those years, I was a handler and trainer for the Broward County Sheriff's Office in Southern Florida. I retired in 2018. When I retired, we had 42 dogs within the department. 17 of those 42 were patrol dogs, which was my responsibility. During my career, I handled 6 dogs total. Only one didn't have a full career. All the rest did. Also, during my career, I've written dozens of published articles in popular canine magazines, competed in my early years and did well in Florida and with the USPCA. Those days are long gone. And taught at numerous seminars and training events in the country and abroad. And I could go on, and I don't want to do that. But the most important thing I think that's unique to my situation or experience is that being a handler and also a trainer in Southern Florida, I was able to go out and FTO, if you will, for so many different young handlers and new dogs, and got to experience firsthand, both from my handling career and theirs, what it was like when you encounter someone on the street that you're justified to have the dog engage with them. So that was a very unique experience for 30 years doing that a lot of people don't get that experience. So I think that adds a little credibility for whatever credibility this old guy has.
Absolutely.
And beyond that, one step beyond that, in 1989, I had a dog in our academy class that no one wanted to catch. And I said this, I think, in our first radio interview years ago. But no one wanted to catch him. He was hard. We had adequate or reasonable training, but the trainers unintentionally never bridged the gap between training and reality. So in 1989, I was shocked because my dog didn't engage as I thought he would have. So it took me a year and a half to recover. During that time, I became very passionate about coming back and having that dog be successful. So I talked to trainers, read books, did everything I could to figure out the genetics and behaviors in animals and aggression. And when I did finally come back to work, the dog was successful. But since that time in 1989 to currently in 2022, we still have engagement failures. It's just amazing, and it's no one's fault, certainly not the dog's fault, but it's just not bridging that gap between training and reality. So that's where the prosthetics came in originally, and they developed over time because I would do seminars or classes, at different conferences, and I would show videos from our unit, and people would say, "Hey, where did you get that rubber arm or whatever?" And I said, "I make them in my garage." They said, "Well, can you make me one?" And over time, it got to be so burdensome that I didn't know who wanted one and if they covered my cost. So I just put up a website. And then after the website had been activated for a while, I got a call from different retailers that wanted to buy the stuff from me. So that's basically the story, how it's grown. It's not something that everybody, necessarily needs or wants. And I understand that. It's certainly not the end of all to cure canine issues. Every dog, every situation is different, but it's another tool in the toolbox. That's all.
Yeah, and I differ with you on that, Steve. I mean, I think everybody should be running their new dog with these things, and I think you're being humble on that end. But it's one of those things. Most of the time, a dog is not going to work out with an agency because there's lack of engagement. Right. And we always had the 3 strikes, you're out kind of rule. Like the dog has 3 attempts, and given that they're nothing crazy and he doesn't engage, then we're looking at maybe replacing that dog. And all the time and money and effort and the bonding that's going on with this dog, it's hard on everyone. Or the second reason why dogs go back to the broker is they're engaging, but on the handler, right? So it's either too much engagement, or not enough. And I think your product is awesome, and it's one of those things where that we don't have a dog leave the basic handler class unless we have worked prosthetic, and even after that, throughout the dog's training until they hit a certain amount of street engagements, it's something that we always go back to. So. Did you want to expound upon? You said did you say your dog was shot on a deployment?
No, I was shot on it.
You were shot on it. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
I can, if you like. If
you're comfortable.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you're comfortable with it.
I mean, I'm not going to go into the full story, but there was a lot of errors that night on my part, as well as what I thought was a failure of the dog. It was an armed robbery suspect that had committed several armed robberies during the late afternoon and at convenience stores. And when I came into work, another bolo came out. Anyway, long story short, another officer got behind the car. They pulled into an area. There was a confrontation, and it led to me sending the dog across the crowded parking lot with people. And the dog was focused on the suspect, but he more or less ran beside him looking for equipment. And I didn't realize it at the time, and we were told back in the 80s that, you got to help your dog. There wasn't much tactics back then. And, we got to help the dog. So I tried to do what I could to help the dog. And there was a struggle, and the suspect obtained a gun, and I was shot during it. The dog did eventually engage the suspect while I was lying in a parking lot with no access to my left arm. It took me a while. I severed my radial nerve and shattered the humerus bone. The doctor said I would never go back to work, but God had different plans, and we were able to come back, and the dog had a good career after that.
Good for you.
And so that's basically it in a nutshell. But like I said in the opening of the call, is that people, this is still happening to people. Maybe not everybody gets shot over it, but it's still happening because the dog is seeing a different picture on the street than he does in training. And you can't duplicate everything you do on the street. And even if you try to duplicate a problem that you had on the street, it's not the same. The handler emotion is not the same. The environment is not the same. Nothing's the same. So all you can do is the best you can to prepare the dog for reality. Show him that picture that he may see on the street.
And Steve, before you came on, we were talking a little bit about a combination of all the tools that we have available to us. Obviously, we're using bite suits and sleeves just like everybody else, and we're using the prosthetics, and we use the muzzle, and we use the hidden sleeve. Is that something you prescribe to? Like, there's not just one option that's going to get them street ready. Are you available to using different tools as well?
Absolutely. I mean, especially on the foundation area. I mean, when we did schools, we did 12, 14-week schools. That was the certification process and the procedures from our department, most of the state of Florida. And so we had a long school, and we did all the foundation. And of course, some dogs come with that foundation of bite work and muzzles and suits. All that is so important to develop that full mouth bite and hold and everything that you do, obedience, out, all of that is important, of course. And we never brought in the prosthetics, and everybody's different, and I'm always telling you this from my perspective. Everybody has different training methods and philosophies, but we never brought the prosthetics in until towards the end of the school when we knew that we had to bridge that training gap. So all these things are very important, but with that said, that's the foundation, and the dog becomes conditioned to the equipment over time. And once you get out of that equipment, hey, this is a different picture. I'm not quite sure what to do here. And not only the picture he sees, smells, and tastes, it's different from the handler perspective. We addressed this in a conference we had years ago on the radio, that the handler can contribute to the dog's failing to engage, because now on the training field, you're all calm and you're telling the dog, whatever your bite command is, and now you go on the street and you're nervous and your heart's beating 100 miles an hour and your voice goes high pitch, and the dog reads that and everything goes to crap. Yeah. So it's the content. I constantly say context. Context is the picture, the setting. That all has to be the same. They say what you do in training should be the same thing you do in reality, and vice versa. And that's true with dogs as well. Of course, safety comes first.
It's funny because we just said that, and right before we brought you on about how much the handler is a component in that engagement scenario. And, we're doing the same thing. Our last week of the basic handler course is really when we hit home on engagement. We do the muzzle, we do the prosthetic, and we're doing the hidden sleeve and all of those things. We're going to show some videos, and I want to preface this because, your story hits at home. Like, engagement, it can mean life or death for the handler, the public. If we don't apprehend that person and the dog doesn't perform like expected, especially when the plan is, involving the dog, and that's the key component, is the dog's supposed to stop the suspect from getting to a certain point, or even the suspect, because, the dog is a de-escalation tool. And now the dog doesn't work, the dog fails, and now potentially we may have to shoot this guy. So when people are watching these videos, especially if they're not active in law enforcement, keep that in mind, how important it is for the dog to engage. And number two, we try to show the dog really a variety of pictures because we can't predict everything they're going to see. And there's often times when a suspect is dangerous and is an imminent threat, and it doesn't appear so to us, right? Because he's not yelling, and I'm going to kill you, and running around. He's just sitting there passive, but he's potentially armed, and we're going to have to handle that situation, and we try to de-escalate with the dog. And so, and guys out there, man, we need to articulate that in our reports, that the dog is a de-escalation tool. It is not deadly force, and a properly trained dog will hopefully intercede, and we can handle the situation before we have to use deadly force. So when we show these videos, please, all the viewers, keep that in mind.
Yeah, and if I could expound on that, I mean, we've had, dogs go in to apprehend a suspect that was mimicking sleep, and he's sleeping on a gun. Now, he's passive and everything else, so those kind of situations have to be analyzed and made as a decision being made in an instant by the handlers. So when we use the prosthetic, just to expound on what you said, of course, some of these videos and some of the training are going to say, people might say, I would never use my dog on that, or that's illegal, or that's not tactically sound. We get all that. But when we're doing the prosthetics, it's about the dog. It's about helping the dog bridge that gap between training and reality. So we need to show him pictures, even though they might not meet the tactical end or the legal end or the procedure end. This is to help the dog transition from the training environment to reality. Just, to elaborate on what you said. And thank you for saying that, bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. We could jump into the videos.
Yeah, start with video number one here.
Yeah. So, and again, like Steve mentioned, this is really nothing to do with the handler, other than, working your dog through. If the dog doesn't engage on the prosthetic, I think it gives the opportunity for the handler to now kind of work through that, right? If there is a problem. But Steve, the first video we have here is kind of your setup with your guy behind the fence with the prosthetic on.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll talk about that. So when using the prosthetics, whether it be the arm with the handle, as this video will show or does show, you've got to plan and replan every exercise. You've got to protect the decoy. Either you put them behind a barrier where the dog can't get them. You can't allow the dog to go past the prosthetic target. So if you're using a long line, we usually, when we do the classes or seminar, the handler's using a line and the instructor's using a second safety line, just to make sure that decoy is protected. When we use, if you take a step further, now you don't want to have the handler directly involved. You want to send the dog from a distance. We're measuring that line from where it's tied out to the point where the dog can make the apprehension on the prosthetic target. So all these things are so important to consider before using this. The other thing is to paint that picture. I like to refer it to as an illusion for the dog. You're painting the picture for the dog that really is an illusion to him. We may look at these videos and say, oh, I can see, the handle of the arm, right? But look at it from the dog's perspective. So in this particular video, this was actually done to demonstrate how we might set it up. We're not just giving the prosthetic arm as a tuck toy, or we're not putting the clothing on it. And we want the dog to engage on something more than material from suits and viewed sleeves. So we want to bring the decoy sleeve over the arm so it looks realistic. And this is an example of how we set that up. So I don't know if the video is playing or you're going to play it now, but that's it.
Yeah.
Steve, we're playing the video while you're talking. So each one of these videos that we bring up, we're playing it while you're talking about it. And I know you know which videos we're showing. One thing I wanted to talk about, because it looks like it's kind of common in the prosthetic world, we're using a lot of chain link. Is that kind of your best friend when it comes to setting some of these scenarios up? Do you have other barriers that you're finding a lot of success with?
Yeah, you guys are asking great questions. And the reason why chain link fences they're so available in South Florida that it's a good tool that we can use. But yeah, we're using all kinds of barriers. We're using containers. But when you use a container, whether it be a car door or whether it be a closet door or even a room door, you got to make sure that dog doesn't, because now you have no protection for the decoy other than the handler holding the line. And so now you have to make sure that you're not going past that door frame and having the dog enter into where the decoy is. You're creating that illusion from outside of that door frame. And yeah, there's a lot, you just use your imagination, you stay safe, and you weigh out the benefits to the risk, and you just, it's an art.
I think watching this, I'm going to have Gregg invest in a large piece of plexiglass that we can put in open door frames.
You know what? That's another thing, and we'll get into that too. The plexiglass is great because I'm getting probably ahead of myself, but when a lot of the trainers or handlers will do the prosthetic leg, they'll block the entire human figure or the entire live decoy behind a bathroom stall or a piece of wood or whatever. That's all great. There's nothing wrong with that. But the dog is not seeing the full human image, and now he only has a choice of going under the wood and making the bite. So he's not making the decision, I see a full human here, and putting that whole picture together and going in and making the bite on the arm or the leg or whatever. So plexiglass is a great tool for protecting the decoy.
Awesome. I think we're going to move on to video number 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the one with the board up. So I'm going to hit play now, and if you want to talk about it, Steve.
Okay. I'm not sure where you begin, but if the dog is already on the scene.
The dog's coming up here in about 2 seconds.
Okay. So this was a large area in Miami that was scheduled for demolition. It was an old Cuban neighborhood that they were going to tear down and make new buildings. So Miami's great for having training areas like that. So the scenario was this dog was searching already for 2 or 3 blocks. So he's going to come. The decoy the wind is always at his back blowing into the search area or to the dog. So the dog comes up, he gets the odor, and he's fired up, and he's got a lot of drive, and the decoy's laying right there, and he's focusing in that piece of wood that's lying up against the fence. Now, to give the dog the benefit of the doubt, the decoy's odor is tunneling in there in that little groove where the wood is standing up against the fence. He may or may not see that decoy. I don't know. At first, is it an avoidance thing? I don't think that it was. I think he's just so preoccupied with going to the source of odor, which the dogs do that and form the association. So once we took the board down, which I don't know if that's gotten to that point yet, you'll see the dog suddenly realize that, no, there's nothing in that behind the board, and there's the decoy. And also, at the same time, the handler was encouraging the dog to go after the prosthetic and the decoy. The decoy lets the prosthetic go a little bit quicker. He told me afterwards because I couldn't hold on to it for nothing. But something to keep in mind while we're watching this, if the dog was doing the same thing that you're seeing there, going in between the board for the scent, getting tunnel vision, little pun there, but if he was doing that and now you had a decoy there in a bite suit, what do you think he would have done? You think he would have got him quicker? I think so, because the odor from the suit would have caused him to go there, because he's seen that picture. He never saw this picture before. And another thing I'd like to say is most of the dogs, well, all of the dogs in these videos are all new dogs that are just making that transition.
Well, the dog looked nice. To me, he looked pretty combative in his hunt. He was very forward, and he was intent. And it goes to 2 things, I think, and you mentioned one of them, right? Like the dog's got odor. There's a board there. What pictures has he seen? Like, oh, okay, he's around this board somewhere.
Behind something.
Yeah. And then the second thing is, let's not forget that our dogs, I always like to compare them to like a T-Rex. Like everybody saw Jurassic Park 7. I don't know. I'm trying to appeal to our audience because like nobody's seen Jurassic Park 1. That was so like there's a Jurassic, but it's when the T-Rex is out there and they're hiding. You're like, oh my God, he's on top of the car, and they're like, don't move. And the T-Rex doesn't see him, and then as soon as there's movement, like boom, the dog, at that point, the T-Rex cues in on him, and the dog is the same. And if that suspect remains passive, it's pretty difficult for our dogs to pick up, somebody that's passive. And so I think
Right.
that's a great like handler exercise as well, because I could see a lot of handlers getting super frustrated. Think if that's on the street and your dog's doing that and you're like, for the love of God,
Yeah.
he's laying right there.
6 inches in front of you. Go get it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then everybody's
Yep.
like, well, what's wrong with your dog? It's like nothing's wrong with him. He sees the world completely different than
Well,
we
and
do.
we do a lot of hides behind doors because of safety issues, right? Like we don't always have, especially when it's no equipment, we don't always have a guy hanging out in the middle of the hallway, laying down. We have to have something like the arm and leg and equipment to be able to do that. And even having a hidden sleeve is dicey if your handler's a little inexperienced with the line work.
Oh yeah, and we'll get into some
Yep.
of that.
All right, get ready to start the next video. It's the gentleman leaning on the rail, sitting in the chair.
Yeah, the ladder.
Okay, we don't know these are gentlemen, especially for the scenario. So this was set up. Actually, this was when we first started using this particular product. This video is pretty old, and so we just started experimenting with it, and that was and using them as the transition towards the end of school. This was a new dog that wasn't out of school yet, but getting close to getting out of school. I believe it was the first time that he was on the prosthetic, so he's not real confident. And the handler had him by the collar just for the protection of the decoy. So the scenario was he's going to do his long search, comes up, dog alerts to the decoy, passive, sitting in a different picture that the dog is normally used to, doesn't offer any compliance. The handler goes in short to protect the decoy, and you can see the dog kind of a little unsure of himself, bouncing around, finally gets a nice full mount bite. The handlers encourage him, and that's where it wound up. So,
Hey, Steve, a couple of things on there. It looked like, do you have your guys wear a gauntlet in between that prosthetic and the actual rubber arm?
good question. It depends how brave the decoy is. You can or you don't have to, but probably most people prefer wearing a small, thin gauntlet. We had a real good one that we were using for a while. I can't get the Amish guy to make it for me. But, so yeah, a gauntlet is a good safety thing, but you don't have to. And I think in the next video coming up, the guy has a different type of gauntlet on as well.
Okay, so we're showing this product now. And which product is this one? What do you call this one?
This is the G2.
G2.
Now, this is the guy in the middle of the room. You're showing that one now?
No, we were actually holding. Greg was holding the arm that had the 3 straps on it.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, that's all right. You can't see that, but
I can't see you guys.
On the table, he had the arm with the 3 straps on it. The one down by the wrist and the 2 up by the elbow.
Yep, and that's a G2.
Correct.
Okay. Cool. All right, we'll show the next one is actually we have somebody sitting in a chair in the middle of the room.
Yeah. This was an issue we had with a lot of this. Again, this is a new dog just getting ready to go out on the street, but we've done this in seminars, and we've had a guy sitting in the middle of a big room, and we've even let the dog on a long line without the handler, but we had the decoy safe enough where the dog couldn't get him, and the dog would literally walk all around them and not pay one bit of attention. So it's a common problem in a lot of the classes that we do. The dog will ignore because they're so conditioned to go in and search with their nose, which is what we want them to do, but they're also conditioned to search rooms and do that pattern. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we'll show some videos a little bit that addresses that as well. But yeah, so the handler took the dog in. The line was measured to go right to the guy in the chair, but because harnesses, collars, and dogs are all different lengths, it was a little short. So the reason why we put the guy in a chair that has wheels, like an office chair, was that he could adjust to the dog as best he could, but we were trying to make the dog go far enough to just engage on the prosthetic arm.
Hey, Steve, I just want to touch upon one thing you mentioned earlier. Just make sure our listeners heard it because it's imperative. It's something we do. We did it out of instinct because we don't trust the new guys. You have to earn trust within our group. And
I agree.
And so a couple things to the handlers out there. Number one, make sure your equipment is in good repair. Are you putting them on the harness, Steve, on this one? Like, would they have a good harness?
Before I retired, we worked our dogs on harnesses. Very few in my area work collars. If the handler and or the dog were a little, dicey or whatever, we might put them on a collar. Or like the video we just saw before this one, the dog was taken up on the collar just to make sure that everybody's, safe. So it depends. And all of this depends on the experience of the decoy, the handler, and the dog, quite honestly.
Sure. So we'll do we'll have usually me hold the long line, and then our decoy, which is usually Phil on the end of this, I'm easing them in on the long line. And then the handler will have a line on like either the fur saver or a flat collar or something like that. But mainly I'm there to provide the back pressure. And so make sure you guys always have like a safety person in there, because we've seen guys get a little ahead of themselves and a little excited and move way too fast. So this is one of those where you really want to slow this thing down.
Absolutely.
All right. So Steve, we're gonna play the next one, which is actually the vehicle extraction. Is this your car we're using here? Is this a PT Cruiser?
That is a PT Cruiser. My daughter had one of those. It's a nice ride.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you can tell it's a little older video because of the PT Cruiser.
It actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. That's nicer than the cars
it was at the time. I don't know what it looks like now.
All right.
So this was a new dog. I think probably the first time on any kind of situation like this. You can see him go in. The handler's on a long line. I think in this particular case, we had the safety line that you recommend, and I do as well. And the dog was a little unsure of himself at first, but went back in the second time and engaged and didn't hold and did a good job.
And I think that's the important thing for handlers that are trying out some of the prosthetics for the first time, or even a hidden sleeve for the first time. Don't be surprised if your dog takes the first attachment to that and it doesn't look like it did with the suit or the sleeve, right? Yeah, that's something, especially, the jute or the French linen, is something that those dogs have been putting their mouth around since they were probably 10 weeks old. As time goes on and we start to transfer to some of this thing, that feels weird in their mouth, and it should feel weird. And they get corrected typically up until this point for biting skin, right? Like typically until we're moving into this transition, if they're biting skin, it's typically the handlers, and there's a hey, knock it the hell off going on. So the dog's like, wait a minute, and it has to work through it. And like Gregg said, there's obviously plenty of dogs out there that'll bite anything anytime, but not all dogs are built that way. So yeah, don't be surprised if you're starting this off and it doesn't go as well as you think it's going to go because your dog is, nuking people in the suit. That's a whole different experience.
Yeah. Yep. And just as a reminder, and we hit upon it in the beginning of this podcast, this has nothing to do with tactics. Don't jump on our comments and go, oh, gee, he didn't have a cover officer and he totally exposed himself there. We get it. This is completely dog training, and you're setting these scenarios up for the dog so that the decoy can remain passive and is protected in pretty much every part of his body, and the only option available is the prosthetic. And so I think that's an important part, and that's what I like about the car extraction right there. It's just showing the dog that, as they go up there, the dog can be free to kind of go forward. I mean, obviously not through the window, but the decoy is pretty much completely protected, and we just got to add that little bit of back pressure. And as we get to that prosthetic, it's like you slow down and then just ease them ever so gently into it.
And I think for our non-police listeners, and we know we have some out there that think that maybe this is a little like, wow, you just keep sending these dogs on these passive people that are not doing anything wrong. Just for a point of reference, most bad guys, when they're trying to get away from the cops, when they hide, they're typically not doing jumping jacks, right? They're sitting quietly and hoping not to be found. So this is normal behavior. This is what happens. Most of our dogs are left to find passive people because bad guys hide, and they hide quietly.
Yeah, and the most difficult engagement or bite for a new dog is the passive guy. Yeah. They're not engaging the dog in prey drive or, in fight or anything like that. And they're just being completely, that's our toughest bite. So that's what we have to train for. And again, a lot of these guys are laying passive, with a potential weapon, sure, right? Or one accessible. It could be the plan where, hey, there's a gun, within reach, and we're going to deploy the dog in hopes to then pull the suspect away from the gun. That could be the plan, you know? And so to the dog, it's going to look just like that, like he's just laying there or sitting there.
Now we're at the, Steve, this is the next one we're doing is the bathroom stall.
Can I just say,
Absolutely.
elaborate?
Yep.
You guys were talking about, civilians that may be watching this or not police personnel. And I agree, but they don't need this for their protection dog.
No.
And not saying that they can't use it. There's no law, or they can purchase stuff like that through vendors if they choose. But police dogs have a little different genetic makeup than most protection dogs or home dogs. And the downside when people, and I don't mean to slight anybody, but when people don't really know the training philosophy and methods behind this, they're going to go in, and I've seen this, they're going to go in and they're going to use the prosthetic arm, and they're going to try to get their dog to bite, and the dog goes in 4 or 5 times, nips it, or then tears it, or they give it to them. What we strive for in police work is a bite and hold. Minimum damage. The dog stays in one place. He has, a good control as far as that procedure goes. So that's what we're looking for. We're not just sending the dog and randomly hoping that he's nipping everywhere. We want him to bite and hold. And so many civilians don't quite know the process behind it all. And again, I'm not making anybody seem better than anybody else. That's certainly not the case. I've learned so much from civilian dog trainers in my career. There's some great ones out there, but that's just a general statement to say, don't go buy one at PetSmart and let your, poodle bite it. That's not what they're made for.
Yeah.
That's my piece.
Agreed. All right. This next video, we're in the bathroom stall with the leg exposed.
Okay. This was a training seminar that police canine consultants Mark Plumsky and Chad Bishop set up. We had a lot of handlers participating, and we did several different scenarios. This particular scenario, they were searching a pretty large office building, and they got the alert at the bathroom door, which was closed. Once they got the alert, they gave a warning. Nobody responded. The guy was supposed to be armed. So the dog was telling the handler he's in the bathroom. The handler opens the door, and the dog goes in. And in this particular case, the dog had one choice, and that was to go under the bathroom stall and bite the prosthetic leg, which I thought he did a pretty decent job.
Yeah, that was a really nice engagement. But that's what you were talking about before, where the dog was only able to see that and not get a full body picture. And so ideally, if we had a clear opening there, but for the safety of the decoy, it's pretty difficult to always have that.
Yep.
Cool. We're on the next one, which looks like it's going to be a leg engagement in a park.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And hey, Steve, real quick, on that last video, the dog goes in, grabs it. It looks like the decoy's trying to hold on to that freaking leg, and the dog's just like not having it. Like he's pulling back, and he eventually rips it from him. Any thoughts on that? On like, are we trying to set it up so we get a lift off on the prosthetic, and then decoy takes off running, or you pull the dog out a little bit frustrated? Just to kind of build that intensity towards the engagement, or versus the carry. Can you talk about those two different endings and when you might apply each one of them?
Sure, and I might apply each one of them depending on what we're trying to accomplish, the experience of the dog or the experience of the decoy. Every dog, everything's different all the time. In my opinion, there's no right or wrong answer. I think if a dog is new at it and it's maybe a weaker dog that's hesitant with the prosthetics, I don't see an issue with shedding it like you would a sleeve if you had to. I also see the other side of it, that you hold on to it as long as possible. You play a little tug of war without losing the illusion and having the dog out. So we do both. It all depends on really the dog.
Yeah, and if I can add one thing to that, we started making the handler come in and do a proper liftoff, because if you pull back, right, you could damage the prosthetic. And so,
yeah, well, not only that, you could damage the dog's tooth if you're putting yin yang pressure like that. It's bad. So you don't, and that's, I'm glad you brought that up actually, because you don't want to use the prosthetics like you would a sleeve, where you're doing that strong tug of war. You can give a little bit, but remember, you said, like you don't want to damage the prosthetic or the dog.
Well, and it's good practice for the handler on the street, because you don't want to pull your dog back on a real bite either. You're going to create canals in that guy. So it's important you grab the dog if you're going to go to the lift off, which is the hard out, or the terminology is rolling your collar up and going up and forward with the release. And in doing so, handlers out there, that's the proper method. You're working opposition reflex as well, so the dog opens up, and then you pull them back, or you grab their collar, tell them to verbal out, they open their mouth. Regardless, we're not grabbing the collar or the harness and just pulling back, and now it's a much more difficult release and a lot more damage on the suspect or the prosthetic or whatever, or the dog, right?
Yep.
Just like what you're mentioning.
Yep.
And I think holding on to it sometimes has been a challenge in the past, and we've done a little bit where you've zip tied it to a chain link fence, so it has a little give. The fence is able to give, and then the handler's still able to go up there and do that tactical out.
So, yeah, guys have used cords or strings or even bungee, but again, it's whatever your imagination, as long as it's safe, go for it.
That's the beauty of it. So this next video is looks like I got a prosthetic leg in front of a fence, and the fence has kind of an opening. I don't know what kind of tennis shoes they are.
Those look like your shoes.
Look like Walmart brand tennis shoes right there. Let me see. All right, so
they're definitely not new era tennis shoes. They look like they're about 10 years old, and this video is probably about that. Okay. So this, even though this looks like a park, Rick, it's not. It's an industrial park. So it was a long search. Obviously, again, we always have the wind at the back of the decoy, and the handler comes in downwind with the dog. The dog alerted, pulled him across the grassy area and to here. And you can see the dog actually come in. He looks up, and that's what we were talking about, the full image, the full human image. So now he knows he can make that choice. I see a full human. I don't always have to go to his arm. I can go to the leg. We don't necessarily like the shoe bites or the foot bites. Mm-hmm. This happened in this case simply probably because the fence hole was not long enough or tall enough to where we could do it safely. But the dog engaged and did his job, and that's basically the background of that video.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, Steve, because, we have to look into the courts as well. And we're not teaching dogs to I'm teaching them to bite the foot or the ankle or whatever, right? Yeah. So like in this situation, maybe we rerun it and I place it so that the dog then comes up further on the leg, right? And then I would document that in training, not a huge deal. But the reality is if the suspect's going to present the foot, then then he might get bit.
Well, right? I think the worst thing that could happen is the dog sees that and doesn't bite, right? Like I can't get what I want, and chooses not to bite the ankle. We just had one of our guys that we sold a dog to recently. The guy was jumping the fence, and the only thing available to the dog was a foot. And the last thing I would want that dog to do, since I'm the one that sold it, was to be like, I don't bite feet. Yeah, and let the guy and let the guy get over the fence, because that would be a bigger problem.
Yeah, great point. Another thing on this prosthetic leg scenarios, we go into pretty much detail when we do this. The decoy is in loose shorts, holding the prosthetic leg underneath the pant leg of the shorts. He has the left shoe on the prosthetic and his right shoe on his left leg. So to the dog, it looks like a guy standing there, and his real I guess it would be right leg, would be propped up on a tree stump or box, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't see three legs when he comes in. Yeah. He sees the image of what a real person would look like in that position. So we go into detail. And again, as I said in the early part, plan and replan, and that's the most important thing.
Good. It looks like this next one's another leg bite at an entryway to a business.
Yeah, gentleman sitting there with a towel on his head and ball cap, looking a little.
Okay. I don't have that. But I think I know the one. It's like a red towel on his head.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. That was actually sent to me on my iPhone from Mark Plumsky from Police Canine Consultants in South Florida, and they were doing some training again. I don't know what the circumstances were as far as the dog, the goal of the dog in the exercise, but they wanted to set up something like you might have a non-compliant person sitting on on a bench or a box, and now this is a completely different picture of the dog. So the dog goes in and makes the bite. That's really all I can tell you on that one.
That's another one. This is definitely one that's clear that you want to have a solid handler. And I think that's the thing, because this guy has no barrier. His leg sticking out, but his other leg, the prosthetic sticking out, but his other leg is a dog head away. So with the wrong handler, there could be some problems with that. And that's the thing to make sure you guys are, when you're setting it up, especially if you're responsible for training, again, make sure your decoy is safe, and that if you don't have a safety line on the dog, like you spoke about, that your handler is competent. And if your handler isn't competent yet with the line work, then we don't set it up like this.
Bold move, Cotton.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, Mark is very meticulous with that. He usually has a safety line or completely trust the handler. There's 2 or 3 guys that we know are very trustworthy. But everybody, even if you are trustworthy, you get excited, you make a mistake or whatever. So, so that was a pretty decent scenario to give the dog a different picture.
Hey, Steve, this next one, it's going to be a hallway with the suspect actually laying in the hallway.
Yep. This was also sent to me from Mark and Chad, and they did this on their iPhone, so it's a little bit foggy. The dog, you can see the dog come in. Because of conditioning, and he came into the building and association, he starts searching the rooms. The guy's laying in the middle of the floor. You never noticed him, or at least smelled him, until he got very close. The handler encouraged the dog to focus on the guy laying on the floor with the what we call the strong arm sleeve from the products that we make. And basically, once he saw the target, made a good apprehension and was successful.
And the strong arm sleeve is the sleeve that has the neoprene wrap attached to it?
That's correct.
Yeah. And that picture, again, and this is one of those things like we were talking about before, if you're a new handler and you're like, what the hell, this guy's sitting right in the middle of the hallway, why is my dog checking doors? There's a good chance because, 100 searches prior to that, he went into a building just like that and found people behind doors. So
exactly. Don't blame the dog.
Yeah. And that's why your product is valuable, because this allows allows the decoy to be out there without all the equipment on and bridging that gap and letting the handler work through some of those problems, and the dog to work through some of those problems.
Yep.
Next one is that a wrestling mat? Sorry, I'm just trying to see.
Yeah, it's going to be indoors, and I think this is Steve, this is the one where the dog looks like it's a deputy, and he makes his announcement and then casts his dog in. His dog kind of starts to search initially as well.
Yeah. Okay, so because of that first video that we just showed with the guy in the hallway, we decided we're going to take it a step further, and we're doing a seminar, and so we applied the same scenario or same picture, and the handlers were having trouble. We wanted them to be successful in engaging in the decoy that was laying in the middle of the floor. So we had to take them in. We measured the line. We had the line tied to a post or something. We measured the line to where it wouldn't go any further than the target prosthetic that was on the decoy, and this was the approach that we made. While this is playing, if it still is,
yep.
It seems that when the dogs do a search, an air search in a building, they're wanting to do the doors, and it's a completely different picture when they're in a compound or outdoors. They're not necessarily focusing on searching behind a tree or whatever, but when they see the decoy laying out flat on the ground, they quickly get a better focus. And again, that seems to be, as you guys pointed out, a conditioning thing. Not to say that it's anything anybody is lacking, but it's something that is definitely obvious different when we do them in training.
Yeah, and Steve, like you said too, it's like they're and like the hallway one, right? There was sunlight coming in the doors behind him, and like I'm not sure how the lighting was for the dog and compared to what the camera shows, but you had a guy in dark clothing laying on a dark mat and motionless. And it's like, again, for those handlers out there, you may see the suspect clear as day, but without movement, the dog, we've seen it time and time again with the suspect standing in the corner and the dog running around searching because he just doesn't doesn't see them, doesn't perceive them. You know, we don't know exactly.
Yeah, the
what
odors, and the odor might be pulling into a room, might be pulling out of a room. Like we don't.
Yeah,
you know, we can't see all that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and this particular video that we just saw, we had the long line measured out, but we still wanted the handler. I don't know if you can see me. Is trying to get the handler to go up a little bit further on the line so that he sees where the dog is going to wind up engaging. So we had to get up a little bit closer. And once the dogs get accustomed to this and the handler, we can trust the handlers, we can tie them to a long line and have the handler stay back behind cover. And we're going to show you that video, I hope, at the very end of the video is how that works.
Yeah, I think that's an important part is the handler started out on like a 20-foot line or whatever it was. But as they get closer to your decoy, they're working their way up the line because they need to guide that dog into the prosthetic and not have that 20 feet of swing back and forth and back and forth. It can be kind of dangerous.
Yep.
So, okay, this next one is kind of the same setup in the mats. It's just the perspective of the decoy, and the guys are at the door.
Yeah, exactly. Same scenario, same day, I believe. This handler, to give you a backdrop, is a good trainer. He's works with the City of Fort Lauderdale, Eric Good. Great trainer. He does actually laser targeting with his dog. So he will target the dog if he wants him to search a room or go to a decoy or even go to a toy in training. So he's done a lot of work with that. It takes a lot of work. He put a lot of time into it. So when he came to the door, gave his announcement after we got out of the way, he lasered the decoy, and the dog went in like a rocket ship. Mm-hmm. We don't necessarily want the dog, in this particular case, because we have an unprotected decoy for the most part, we don't really want the dog to come in like a rocket ship. We want to have that control and come in slowly, at least until we know the distance or the targeting. So Eric does a good job with the laser targeting, and this is the video, if you haven't already showed it.
Yeah, like he comes shooting in there like a rocket, like you said. Yeah. Like the decoy had to kind of protect himself there.
Yeah, he definitely threw that arm up. Which, if I'm a really bad guy and I see a dog running at me, I'd probably throw my arm up too. So that's a natural instinct. But you could see it got a little dicey when the dog popped off a little bit because of the speed. I like your idea of slowing things down a little bit.
Yeah, and the whole laser thing, you know, we've done the laser thing. I did the laser with my last dog, and you know, that's probably a whole another podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but it shows how well it worked in that situation, right? So the dog's eyes don't pick up the guy. You put the laser on him, and then suddenly the dog's like, "Oh, okay, look, you know, I'm running that way anyway." And then they just, you know, you kind of eliminate the whole. Does he see him? Does he not see him? I'm going to go search some rooms and everything else.
You just got to make sure not to do any drinking games with the laser and your dog.
Well, and you know what? This is true. Here's an important point, though. So say you're called to deploy with a tactical team, and you're doing a deceased verification. The guy might be laying on a gun, and you've got tactical guys sitting in the room in front of you, lethal cover, and you're deploying behind them. And here you go, you deploy your dog. We just saw two dogs, right, go into search mode, which is where your tactical and your cover guys could be.
Right.
You know, so if you guys are running a tactical dog out there and you're running with the team, I think the lasers, it's right up there on my list of things to show your dog, because that could have been a big problem. And
because the only guy not moving in the room is the guy you need to be apprehending, right? You know, the SWAT guys are moving around. They're interesting to the dog.
Yeah, and they're the closest to the dog.
Yeah.
You know, they're downrange in the dog's mind. So, so that's a good video, Steve. Hey, and then here's the last.
Okay, before you press play on this one, can I give you a backdrop on it, or
please do.
Set it up. Okay, this was in Miami as well, in an old neighborhood that's probably built in the 50s. 4 or 5 block area. We had the train in. The dog did a search in the neighborhood that was already cleared out of people and things for demolition. Did a long area search in the neighborhood. To the left of the picture you're seeing is the wall of that, where the porch is. It stretches out about 75 feet to a corner. So the dog picked up on the decoy before he reached that corner. And that was the plan. Again, plan and you plan. The wind's at the decoy's left side, our right side, blowing out away from them. So the dog does the search. He hits the odor. before he reaches the corner of our house. So the guys had said, well, let's do something more tactical. In this case, not every case we do, but in this case, they wanted to do something a little more tactical. So when they came to the corner, they wanted to take a position of cover, give their announcements, and if there was no compliance from this guy who was supposed to be on a gun, there was no compliance, they would send the dog on a line that we had secured and secured again to where the line would just reach the prosthetics. So it was a lot of fun, really a lot of fun with it. A lot of people went through it. So when they reached that corner, they gave the announcement, no compliance. When the time was right, they sent the dog. In this particular video, the dog was short, the harness was short, and he didn't quite engage the sleeve like we had wanted to. And this is an important thing to mention if it doesn't go the way you want it. So the dog came in, didn't reach it. We saw that. So now we had to adjust the decoy, but we didn't want to ruin the exercise. And keep in mind that the dog doesn't really know what's going on, who's tying what or who's holding what. He's focused on the decoy. So we had the handler, let's say the dog was like a foot from the prosthetic. We now had the handler just pull him back a little bit until the decoy readjusted, and then we let the line out to where he could go in for the bite. Even though that happened, the handler kind of hesitated to let the line go and go into the gauge. So that's the back story of this whole thing, and you can do the video anytime you want. I'll try to go through it.
Okay.
As you play.
Yeah, we're playing it now.
Yep. Just
okay.
Play. The dog hasn't come into the scene yet.
Okay, he should come in a minute, and you'll see he's a little short of the prosthetic sleeve.
There he is.
Right? So at that point, we had to make a minor adjustment, which we didn't really want to do, but we had the handler, hold on to the dog, pull it back a little bit until that decoy was set, and then the dog finally is released and goes in and makes pretty good full mouth bite. That sleeve's pretty thick, by the way. Not so much thick. It's just a big sleeve. The guy that models for that is actually a pretty big guy. So
actually, we were talking about this earlier about making young dogs successful on their early apprehensions. I think that back, and tell me if you disagree, I think that back pressure that was applied to that dog and kind of building him up there as he hovered over the top of that, the prosthetic, actually probably made him a little more ready to get that full mouth bite. Like he was a little more excited about it.
For sure. Frustration builds aggression. That's a fact.
Yeah.
So, he was frustrated, and that aggression built.
Yep, and that's a good example, young handlers. If you have or new handlers, if you have a back tie on your dog and you want to make them more successful, add a smidge more frustration to it, and it'll help you out on the street on those early bites.
So,
hey, Steve, I got that one in particular in my hand right now. The strong arm, yeah. You can see actually we've been using this one. So, do you wear anything under this at all, or we generally don't, because it actually
I
provides.
don't decoy anymore, Greg.
You don't?
That's dangerous work.
I'm too old, so I don't wear anything under it, for sure, because I don't wear it.
Yeah.
So most people don't wear anything under it.
Yeah.
Something that's kind of important with that sleeve is the neoprene will not protect you from getting bit. And there's a couple of sweet spots in there. One is if the dog gets on the wrist, it's going to hurt. Mm-hmm. The other one is if he gets over that rubberized material and gets into the neoprene.
Yeah.
So
been there.
Some guys that I work with are masters at just twisting that forearm a little bit so that the dog targets the prosthetic or the rubber as opposed to the neoprene. Some of the dogs with big muzzles and mouths, if they come in hard, they're going to get a little bit over that. That's something that we haven't seemed to be able to do. Everything that we've done with these prosthetics has a pro and con, and we try to do more pro than con. There are some issues that can't really be straightened out. I'm not a multi-million-dollar corporation that I can get a machine and make the perfect prosthetic. I started this because people needed it, and we've continued. So there's going to be some little things, and one of them is if you get a dog that comes over the top, so that's where the control comes in by the back tie or the handler or the trainer and the skill of the decoy. So if it looks like, the dog's coming in and he's going to go over, just rotate that form a little bit and target him on that prosthetic.
Steve, can you explain to us what you like better about the prosthetic that has the straps and the prosthetic that has the neoprene? Because I assume there's strengths and weaknesses in both that you are seeing and that you've kind of developed, and what you like and what you don't like.
I mean, that calls for a very transparent answer. No, and I don't mind. The ones with the handle are difficult to hold on to. Sometimes the handle over time. We have stuff that we've used in training for years, and they're still being used. But it depends on how you use them, how much you let the dog thrash, pull, whatever.
Right.
But the ones with the handles, they get ripped out sometimes from your hand.
Yep.
The handles, they get damaged. That happens.
Yeah.
The same with the leg. The next thing that we had developed over time was because with the handles, you couldn't get close and personal with the dog. You had to sort of either hang onto it from a distance or release it. So it wasn't that intimate relationship where like a sleeve and you get them nice and tight and put your nose in their nose, where the G2, the ones with the 3 straps, that gave you a little more ability to do that. The only issue with those is over a long time the straps will weaken, but I think that is probably the ones with the stick are the most durable as far as the appendage, and the ones with the straps is very durable as well, but sometimes the straps get weak over time.
Or it causes a little bit of twisting. And I like the ones with the straps a little better. I feel like it gives a little better picture to the dog. I feel safer in the strong arm, I think, but I like the picture.
Yeah.
I like the picture that the one with the straps gives.
I think the strong arm, you've got to be much more careful with the control, even more so than the G2, because if the dog gets over the rubber and gets into the neoprene, the other thing is because it's so big, a lot of dogs don't feel quite as comfortable as they do on the G2 because the G2 is a little thinner arm overall. If I had, and this is my personal thing, and you know me, I don't do this to sell these things or to make money. If I had a personal preference and the only one I would get, I only have one to get after the SAS or the G2, I'd probably go with the G2. But the SAS, honestly, is a popular item. So, it's what you're doing, what your goal is, and how you can tackle that goal.
And you were talking about showing with the leg, showing a picture. Gregg likes to shove people up in a tree so they can see the whole body, and then the first thing that drops down is the leg. Which makes it really nice, right? So it's very clear to the dog what they're looking at. And I'm sure you've had 1,000 requests for different changes. If it's possible, if there's a stick out there that has a handle that I can stick my fingers through, like something that I would pull on, like a ripcord type thing, where my hand can reach through, like a grip of some sort and hold on to it, that would be amazing for the leg.
Yeah, we get a lot of requests, and we've done some custom stuff for the military, and again, it goes into time and expense, because
right, the amount of money that you're spending on research and development.
Yeah, I'm not in it to get on Shark Tank, but at the same time, I got to cover my costs, and so when people ask for something special, I got to make a whole new mold or come up with a manufacturer that comes up with something. So it's a little difficult, but yeah, I can make changes. You give me the handle and I'll put it in a mold.
We'll also hashtag Shark Tank on that, because I believe Robert, the guy with the cool hair on the show, has a protection dog that trains down at Gold Coast.
Does he really?
Yeah. He does.
I think with Gold Coast?
Yep. I've seen it on their Instagram, on his Instagram and theirs. So we know that there's a dog down there and a guy with a bunch of money that develops things. So maybe that's the path.
And Rodney's so secretive with his clients. He never would have told me that, but I'm glad you have some insight on that.
Yep. It was public information. I didn't steal it from any secret source.
That's funny.
So Steve, for guys out there watching this, like, how do they find you? How do they find your products? How can they get these themselves?
Well, I don't like to actually sell them to individuals because it's a lot of packing and logistics and everything else. I make them as a manufacturer and sell them to different vendors.
Okay.
So they can go on armandleggin.com and see the vendors that handle our stuff. And those vendors came on early. We have an agreement to use them exclusively. It's not that we're sliding anybody else, but those vendors have been selling that stuff for us, so that they can get them on there. If they need to contact me personally, I guess you guys would have my phone number and email. You're certainly welcome to put that out there. I guess. Well, now that I'm thinking about this being on YouTube, maybe that's not a good idea.
We'll just give your website. How's that? I'm going to have that on the bottom here as we speak.
Dawned on me.
Yeah. Well, let's just go to the website.
If they go to the website, they can get a hold of me.
And you'll have your vendors and stuff on there, and then they can just click on that and order the product.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Cool.
Well, it's definitely a product that we use frequently. We rely on it to bridge those gaps with the dogs. It's something that's important to us, just like the hidden sleeve and the muzzles like Gregg was talking about. We appreciate the fact that you took what was a weakness in your own program and was honest about it and went out and created this product to make your dog better and everybody else's dog better. Yeah. It's definitely something that benefits the industry. So we appreciate your time and your effort with the product and with the education on it.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I know not just me, but the canine community appreciates what you guys do.
Awesome, Steve. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. God bless.
Thanks, buddy. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was really, really good. I'm glad we were able to bring those videos on. I think the important thing is, and we talked about it at the beginning, obviously we have a lot of listeners that are audio-based, catch us on their, whatever their podcast platform is. This is one of those that if you're going to get the most from it, you got to jump over to YouTube. This isn't a plug. It does help, but this is not a plug for our YouTube channel. This is a plug for you guys as listeners and watchers to head over there, because the scenarios that he put on there are really good to learn from. We'll definitely steal some of those and use them ourselves. So
yeah, and here's the thing about Steve. So I've been talking back and forth with Steve for a few years now, and he is genuine. Like, he is in it for the dogs. His whole story about, like you said, like, hey, I realized I have an issue with my dog's engagement, and then coming up with his own to make this, and then sharing this with the world. There's a lot of vendors out there, and there's some people that are their heart's in the right place, and there's some people that aren't. And I can tell you, his integrity, his heart's in the right place. Like, he really cares about the handlers out there, and that's the whole motivation for him making these things. He's not getting rich off of them. So if you're going to support anybody in their business, just support Steve.
And if you're a small agency and this seems like a big expense for you, get a few surrounding agencies and go in on it together. And then don't let your dogs.
They're a couple $100. So if you're freaking too cheap to freaking
that's
just
a problem
spend a couple
too.
$100 for something that could save your life or somebody else's life because your dog's lack of engagement, then so be it.
And it makes you feel good. Like I mean, having your dog work on this gives you that, because everybody goes out there before they've had their first apprehension, and you have that anxiety every time you go to a call. Like, is it going to be all right? Is it going to happen? Is it going to, like, this bridges that gap? Yeah. And it makes you feel a lot better about going 10-8. And the other thing is, if you have these, don't let your dogs just thrash these. They are not meant for long-term thrashing and pulling and tugging. Like, you're going to pull chunks out of it. Make it quick and meaningful.
Well, and I'm not going to give up the agency that did this, but they're like, hey, we got the prosthetic. I'm like, how'd you use it? And they're like, put a dog on a back tie and make it a toy. And no, do everything.
Now you're back to equipment.
You're back to making it equipment. And so kind of show the dog the picture, in the way that you see on the videos. That's really what they were designed for. So, yeah.
And if you guys have something else that you're using out there in the comments, especially on YouTube, let us know how you're doing things. We say it all the time. We come here because we have some information to share, but we are students and we like to learn. Absolutely. And every time we put something out there, somebody reaches out to us and tells us what they're doing, we learn something all the time. So if you guys have got something that you're doing with this and it's working really well and you want to share it with us, please do, and we'll put it out.
Yeah, hey, everybody knows my story. When I started off, my dog saw a sleeve and a bite suit like twice, and I hit the street way back in the late 90s. So, when we hopefully we don't come off too preachy to you guys, but it's just because of, we fucking care.
We're trying to save you a lot of the pitfalls that we fell in.
Yeah. And we want you to go home safe to your family. So
that being said,
101%.
101%.
Train hard.
Be safe.